What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, congratulations. You are officially out of possibilities in which you would have to watch LSU play in an SEC championship, college football playoff. That very, very, very slim chance died a painful, painful death in the swamp. So congratulations to you.
Yes, man, it's a beautiful morning, and all the pregame and all the lead up. It was like, well, if LSU wins this game and they went out and they beat Diego Pavia, and then everybody else does 3 backflips that we can get in. And I'm like, guys, please save me from this team. And so now I feel free. I'm aware that LSU is bad and I can live my life. It's very exciting.
There you go. And by the way, if we sound a little bit different, it's because we are on Zoom, not on Riverside, which our Riverside, we started recording and then all of a sudden it decided to shut down like 10 minutes in. So we sound a little
All
bit
my
different.
homies hate Riverside.
Not quite, not quite. But yeah, just a very annoying thing to deal with. So apologies if we do sound a little bit different. Have a lot of action to get to today, even though there are only 4 games. A lot of stuff that we're going to dig into. SEC championship talk. I'm going to, of course, do our CFP top 12 projection, how we think that'll look on Tuesday night. And of course, we're going to discuss all 4 games in the SEC that were non-cake week type games. So obviously, we're starting Tennessee and Georgia. Georgia, confirmed not dead. Not dead. Not dead at all. Not dead after losing to Ole Miss like it did for loss number 2. Not dead after falling behind 10-0 in their own building and looking like it was the same old struggling Georgia offense. Definitely not dead. Kirby Smart beats Tennessee for the 8th consecutive year. Still has not lost at home in the 2020s. 45-1 at Sanford Stadium since the start of the 2017 season. And this was just an incredibly impressive response all around. Dare I say, most complete game that this Georgia team has played all year, considering the circumstances, considering that if it had anything less than that, it was going to lose this game against Tennessee, and Georgia would be out at with 3 losses. So I think all of that stuff is fair to say after the way that it battled back down 10-0. And most notably, Carson Beck, man. Carson
Mhm.
Beck. Carson Beck, Toby Keith game. We saw it. We saw it play out. Will,
Connor,
would you?
would you say this is the best game of Carson Beck's career?
I think it is. I think it is. And you could probably throw last year's Tennessee game into that as well,
Mhm.
considering how that started with the 75-yard touchdown run by Jalen Wright in that one. And Nealand is rocking. I think, who was he without? Was he without McConkey and Bowers in that one? Maybe Bowers was back. I don't remember. But yeah, this was the type of game that Georgia had been waiting to see from Carson Beck. 347 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Carson Beck had more rushing touchdowns than interceptions in this one, just
Mhm.
as everyone predicted. Shout out to you if you did some sort of that's not even a parlay, but if you bet that that would happen, the over on Carson Beck rushing touchdowns and the under on interceptions, whatever, and it was the rushing that got him going. It was because the scramble to break 3 Tennessee tackles was the turning point of his night, maybe the turning point of Georgia's season. TBD on that. Georgia was down 10-0 early, and it's early in the second quarter after a long catch by Dom Lovett. Finally, a Georgia receiver makes a play that he probably shouldn't when Georgia gets this free play, and they're able to get set up into Tennessee territory. Beck escapes the pocket, shakes off 2 guys to do that, and then another guy in the open field, and he tries to run through a Tennessee defender. Just tries to run through him. He does the first down signal. He's fired up in ways that you typically don't see with Carson Beck. And
Mhm.
he admitted afterwards that was a moment that got him really fired up. And it was obvious. He insisted that he was a dual threat quarterback in high school.
He was a threat, man. He was a threat. We saw it. Yeah, we saw Mike Beck, man. We saw him take off, and yeah, this is the stuff that and this is the thing I stress with people. I think even Georgia fans were kind of on our side about Beck. This needed to be a prove it game, but you can see a guy play a certain way, and him change everything he does on the football field, and it not make you wrong. I think this is exactly what we saw at Carson Beck, and exactly what we've seen out of Kirby Smart over and over again, right? In these back against the wall situations where it started to be like, oh, this could be the end for Georgia. Like the dynasty's dead, Paul. And of course it's against Tennessee. So yeah, I mean, he hit 10 different receivers. I think that's a really big deal on this one. And like I said, this is the stuff that in the preseason, we all say who is going to take the next step. You have your all SEC quarterbacks, your all American quarterbacks usually heading to the NFL. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels are collective boys, right? And so it's like, who is going to take that spot in the national spotlight? Carson Beck obviously was sitting right there. And what you saw on Saturday night is why, right? It's the fact that the receivers weren't really doing him a lot of favors, right? They had some jobs. The running game, ETN was out. You
ETN
had
out, yeah.
Nate Frazier, young player, nice enough player, but sometimes you need a little vanilla Vic going. Sometimes if the throw isn't there, you don't need to just stare at the DB and say, "Here you go," right? And like that's the thing, right? It's the fact that Carson Beck was able to go from a negative, right, to everybody saying, okay, Carson Beck, if they just had an average quarterback, they would be in a better spot. To, oh, wow, everyone is letting me down, but my offensive line, nice offensive line night, right? And there's a drop. I'm not going to scream at my receiver. I'm going to get back up and make the next play.
By the way, just need it on record. Carson Beck had 167 rushing yards his senior year, according
Mm-hmm.
to his bio on Georgia's official website. I threat maybe he's got 3 plays in the huddle that stand out. I'd have to go back and check that out, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe let's not get carried away. It was very clear though that he got going as a result of that, and he needed a play like that where all of a sudden he just feels like he's kind of in the moment. He's present in ways that you questioned early on in some of
Mm-hmm.
these showings. Like, dude, where is your head at? What are you seeing? And he gave Georgia the shot of life that it needed. He spoke to the team earlier in the week and talks about how, the playoff starts now, and it was out of character for him to speak up in that sort of way. I'm not sure why it took getting to that point for him to speak out like that, but nonetheless, he delivered. He absolutely delivered. And for all the questions about does Carson Beck still have that in him, he showed it. He showed it. Like,
What does he have in him?
he's got that dog in him. He's got that dog in him.
Got
Okay.
that dog in him.
Fun, very much intended. But his situation that feels like it should be working against him in every way. And it would have been easy for him to, tuck his tail between the legs, feel sorry for himself. Again, we're just loaded with dog puns today. But you're without Trevor Etienne. Dylan Bell goes down early in this game, so you're without really 2 rushing threats. Like just in terms of guys that you were relying on in the last few weeks, and Carson Beck said, no, I'm going to figure this out against one of the nation's best defenses. It helped that, as you said, Georgia's offensive line played its tail off, and they were tremendous in pass protection. Again,
So many
dog
dog
puns,
puns.
so many dog puns. Oh my God, they're all dog puns. Carson Beck didn't get sacked once, not once. Against that defensive line, that is no small feat. And I thought they did a really nice job. Mike Bobo did dialing up looks to get him comfortable. Once they kind of recognized what he was doing well, what was working, they were able to play to their strengths in the second half of that game. And the long touchdown drives. Long touchdown drives. You talk about 10 different receivers. How about the fact that Georgia had 6 different guys have a 20-yard catch, 3 of which were tight ends. So he's like, hey, I don't feel like I've got a whole lot working in the passing game. I got a very different group than what I initially expected. I'll just still find a way. And part of that was certainly scheme and being able to get some of those guys open. But yeah, even an Oscar Delp sighting, first touchdowns of the year for him. Didn't like that Oscar Delp gets into the end zone and Fowler compared him to Brock Bowers. I don't need that. Okay. We don't
Okay,
need to go
Brock Bowers
there.
is getting into the Cam Newton, Joe Burrow
I
territory.
know he
It's
is.
like, look, every good tight end is not Kyle Pitts. Every good tight end is not Brock Bowers. Pick your own category.
Yeah, don't like that. Don't like that one bit. But love Georgia's response. I mean, 31-7, they finished that game against a defense that had not allowed 20 points all year. I mean, that is just absolutely wild. Even London Humphreys getting involved. I mean, the ball that Beck threw to him was a thing of beauty. 3rd and 2, 7 minutes left. Humphreys in single coverage. And Georgia needs to be able to have another one of those long drives if it's going to put this game away up a touchdown. And Humphreys single coverage on the outside with Jermon McCoy, which I would think that's advantage McCoy in that spot. And Beck just kind of puts it on his hip in a spot where he basically says, buddy, if you're dropping this pass, you're getting off this field and you're finding a new place to play football, because that's how accurate he was. And yeah, he was brilliant. Carson Beck was every bit the player that we thought he could be coming into this season when Georgia just had to have it. And this was a reminder, Will, throwing Georgia is hard. It is
Yeah.
really hard to dethrone this team. And I say dethrone, even though, yes, they didn't win a national championship last year. They didn't win an SEC championship last year. That Bama still is the reigning SEC champ. I get that.
Beating Alabama also confirmed hard.
Beating out, yes, you know better than anybody. Beating Alabama is still very, very hard. If you were going to dethrone Georgia and knock them out of the national championship picture altogether, you were going to have to play the best game of your season. I mean, that I think we can still say that, even though it felt like we still say Alabama, best game of their season, Ole Miss, best game of their season. We still got their A games on those nights. And Tennessee didn't have its A game. Mm-mm. And look, I know let's acknowledge that the drive that I mentioned before with Beck, having the run and getting fired up, that only happened as a result of the face mask penalty, which I didn't see on replay. Apparently, officials saw it in real time where he got the hand inside the face mask. That extends the drive. I get that happened. That didn't go Tennessee's way. Carson Beck false starting didn't go Tennessee's way. What
Sure.
a, I mean,
Yeah, I saw a little Zapruder film on Twitter, right? Like, I get it, guys. Like, the kick goes out of bounds. We're doing the geometric positioning. We got a couple of fumbles go here and there. Here's the way I'll see it. As a guy who's done the Zapruder film, right? That was me after South Carolina. I'm guilty. But, if Carson Beck is a guy that if you just sit in cover 3 and you just end up with an interception, like, I feel like over the last 5 or 6 weeks, me and you could have played DV and just ended up with a Carson Beck football a la Kirby Smart, Peyton Manning. So if you can't pick this guy off at least once, if not 2 times, you kind of just deserve to lose to Georgia, dude. Even in the Texas game, he was getting picked off multiple times.
and that was what Tim Banks came out and said, look, I trust my defensive backfield to be able to win these
Mm-hmm.
matchups on the outside. I'm like, hey, I feel good about the way that we line up with these Georgia receivers. And I don't really blame him for that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily think that was a fault. Could they have
Right.
made those adjustments? But even at the end of the game, if you tell me I've got Jermon McCoy on London Humphreys, I'm taking McCoy. All right. I'm just going to do something like that. So, look, it was not the game plan that Tennessee hoped to be able to follow. And if you were going to beat Georgia, it wasn't just going to be those two things going against you. Like, you can't get shut out in the second half. You can't go without a sack. You can't go without a 20-yard pass. You can't leave some meat on the bone with Dylan Sampson, which honestly I thought they did. I thought their game plan early on was working and they got away from it. It seemed like they were getting 5-6 yards sort of at will with Sampson and Lewis. No Deshaun Bishop in this one. He's still banged up. But when Sampson only had the 11 carries in the first half and had the nice run at the end of the first half just to be able to to take the lead, a play in which even Lauren was saying like, whoa, that dude can jet. He is fast.
Mm-hmm.
How big is he? And I was like, yeah, that's Dylan Sampson. He's kind of
Large.
awesome. Yeah.
That's the
Not
best
not that
part.
large.
Yeah.
Not that large. Like 5'9", 205.
Dylan Sampson's, well, I guess the 205. Yeah, he's like yoked. Like, he plays big.
Yeah, definitely plays big, and he hits that burst and runs extremely hard. But yeah, I mean, like 11 carries in the first half for him, and I thought he was going to have a 30 touch night. I thought unless there was something that I missed and I just didn't see it and I know there was one point I think where he asked to come out of the game, but I was waiting for Georgia to have to be like, guys, we're in trouble. Dylan Sampson's getting ripping off 6, 7, 8 yards, and we don't really have an answer for it. And Tennessee was going to take control. And that didn't really happen. And I understand Tennessee got off schedule a couple of those times, but it just felt like there were opportunities that they could have taken advantage of that they really didn't in the ground game, and Tennessee just couldn't really get that one play to be able to stop the bleeding
I'll
defensively. I
say
think,
too, though, real quick, like, I think so much of college football is about not losing the game, about not being yourself. More on that later, folks. And I think
yeah,
Tennessee played a pretty good game. Like, I think at the end of the day, if we're thinking of what we're scared of with Tennessee is they show up and they have 86 passing yards. Like, they show up and they have no idea how to do the process of football that doesn't involve handing it to Dylan Sampson and
yeah,
running
Nico was
forward.
fine. Like
Yeah,
Nico,
like
Nico
Nico
was
played like a
okay.
pretty good game. He did a little bit with his legs that I liked, and that's not
Yeah,
going to come out in the box score because the weird way we do sacks don't get me started again. But like there were a couple of key like third down runs by him as well. So like I think this offense, this was the classic Josh Heupel script a throwback Josh Heupel script where they get going early
Yep.
and you go, oh my gosh, everything is going their way. They're unstoppable. And then they forget how to play football versus they learn how to play football in the fourth quarter, which we've seen usually
Yeah,
this year.
Tennessee had 165 sack adjusted rushing yards, 4.9 yards a carry.
Mm-hmm.
I, and instead, Nico ends up with 33 passing attempts in this one. And I thought that they were a little bit too pass happy. Maybe they like
Yeah.
those matchups on the outside. Georgia's corners obviously struggled last week. And you felt like with a healthier group that they were going to be able to take advantage of that. And instead, this didn't end up being that type of offensive showing. And it was, yes, you're exactly right. This has kind of just been the MO. Tennessee, great start against Georgia, and then nothing really can get going the rest of the day. It's pretty clear. Tennessee just doesn't match up well against Georgia.
Yeah.
We now have 4 games of the Josh Heupel Kirby Smart matchup, and to see the lack of response from Tennessee, I think is just pretty telling, all things considered. It's not to say that they collapsed and that they puked on their shoes or anything like that, but this is still a matchup that Josh Heupel, for whatever reason, can't quite get over the hump. You've got your multiple wins against Florida and Bama, which is all well and good when you're the head coach at Tennessee, when we know the decade of dysfunction that you had. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But you're still stuck on 0 with Georgia and didn't even stay within single digits of them once again. So I think for Tennessee, this game doesn't drastically think how I feel about who they are. I think we've kind of felt for a while now. This is just sort of the Tennessee MO, although seeing their pass rush neutralized in this one. James Pierce's best play of the game was actually a stunt on a run stop. I think it was Frazier up the middle where you just saw how quick he was. And then I think he hurt his shoulder very briefly afterwards. And they did some things as well in the defensive line where there were some of those tip passes early. So I'm not saying that they were totally neutralized. I shouldn't say it like that. But it just where they couldn't disrupt you in the ways that they have disrupted teams all year. I thought that was, I think disappointing. We can say that. But does it all of a sudden mean that Tennessee's defensive line is liability? Of course not. This is about to get really tense for Tennessee. Okay. Should get to 10-2 as long as they can, get past the dynamo that is Diego Pavia. No guarantees. No guarantees.
Man.
Okay. We're not assuming anything.
Mm-hmm.
But with all these teams at 10-2, the selection committee is going to have a debate that is unlike any that they've had, right? And I understand.
We love it when that happens. Those guys making decisions.
This is why they want the automatic bids to take this out of the selection committee, by the way.
I'm about to say, let's just do March Madness because these guys will find a way anyway.
Here's the problem for Tennessee, okay? Because I think Tennessee fans are going to watch that ranking show on Tuesday night and go, wow, we're just getting totally screwed, okay? Tennessee fans, I fully understand you want to be ranked ahead of Alabama. And if you guys are both sitting there at 10-2, you will look at Alabama and say, we beat them. Why are we not ranked ahead of them? Apply that logic to everywhere else and tell me it all makes sense. Okay? Do that. Because you're just applying that logic to your own team and not to other teams. And that's the problem. Okay? This cluster, the way that it is now working with all these teams at 10-2, where it looks like a team is going to get into the SEC championship, not based on head-to-head, but based on the record of or the winning percentage of conference opponents. That's what it's looking like this is going to come down to. And that could end up favoring Bama. Bama has the slight edge. Bill Bender did a great breakdown in Sporting News this morning that everybody should go check out if you're kind of wondering where exactly your team is going to fall if it is in that 10-2 mix. But the problem for Tennessee, you want to apply that logic to your own team, and you don't want to apply it to the others because what did Ole Miss do to Georgia?
Beat Georgia.
Ole Miss beat them like a drum.
Pretty bad, yeah.
What did Alabama do to Georgia? Alabama beat Georgia. So head-to-head, I agree, should count for something. It is not everything. And if you're telling yourself that you're just getting screwed because of that, apply that logic to those other teams in the SEC because that's where it falls apart. And that's why the selection committee is ultimately going to look at quality of wins. And Tennessee right now, it still has, and I think it was like 53% that they left it at. And I take those odds for what they are. They have proven to be very, very wrong a lot of different times with this, so I would take that with a grain of salt. Tennessee still has what we would say in the poker world outs. Okay. If you've ever
Mhm.
played poker, you kind of know what I'm saying. Tennessee right now is like the team or the player in poker that flops a flush draw. And you're sitting there going, all right, we've got a lot of different, maybe an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw or something like that. As of right now, we're probably in the outside looking in, but there are still things that can happen that would benefit us. Tennessee is the team that needs to start rooting for chaos. Okay. You
I was
need,
gonna say what we're not accounting for is everybody else at the table is
yes,
hammered.
yes. Everyone else at the table is like 3, 4 whiskeys deep, and they're starting to feel a little bit loose. Okay.
Somebody
So
just said Yahtzee. You might have a
yeah.
chance here, son.
Tennessee, I think if chalk plays out, would be in a really tough spot. Now,
Mhm.
there are things that can happen that could benefit Tennessee, right? Alabama losing at Oklahoma, Ole Miss losing at Florida, um, Texas A&M. You know, well, actually, it benefits Texas A&M needs to fall out of the mix, and Texas A&M needs to not beat Texas, right? Because you don't want Texas A&M, you don't want Texas sitting there at 10-2, and then that's another 10-2 team that you have to compare your resume to. But the
Mhm.
problem for Tennessee, okay, is that they are now in a really difficult spot because they didn't have to play those teams in that 10-2 cluster. The schedule was what it was. All right. And now they're going to be scratching their head going, uh, where are our quality wins? Tennessee right now, I think, has one win, if I'm not mistaken, against a team that is bowl eligible, and that's the Bama win, right?
Man.
That's tough. That's tough. And that's what this is ultimately going to come down to. This isn't going to be some big conspiracy theory against Tennessee. Okay. I know that's not going to be received well, but because the head to head just has all this overlap, you cannot cleanly rank teams based on head to head. And that is what is going to be forgotten in all of these debates. And I understand it. That is frustrating. That is a terrible development. But look at it right now and tell me that logic applies everywhere because it doesn't.
Yeah, and I mean, you've just instructed me on how many random teams in the SEC are 5-5. Because, like, yeah, I mean, Oklahoma, even the loss to Arkansas at this point is aging like milk because they're not a good football team. So, like, yeah, I'm right there with you. It's like, it's the blessing and the curse of not playing the other 10-2 teams. Where it's like, yeah, you got to play, not got to. It's never you never get to play Alabama. You beat Alabama. That's really impressive. But these other teams are beating up on each other and ending up 10-2. That was your only entry into this. And so yeah, I mean, other than the Georgia game, which we saw how that went. So yeah, I mean, if you only get two bites of the apple, you got to make them both count, basically.
Yeah, and you're 1-1 in those games. You didn't face the Texas schools, right? You didn't have an Ole Miss draw this year. Okay. And that right now is a tough pill to swallow. Okay. So
And
Tennessee
you
could
lost to the
still,
bad team. That's the thing. Hey, one thing I
yeah,
can say as an LSU fan, Arkansas could be had. All right. We've seen that the last Ole Miss. We'll tell you
yeah.
how Arkansas could be had. So if you beat that team, there's no questions asked here. You're chilling.
Yeah, I think Tuesday night's going to be frustrating for Tennessee fans. Okay, I do, and we'll get to the ranking later with that. But I one last thing on Georgia, Will.
Hmm.
I don't know that this means that Georgia has turned the corner, so to
Hmm.
speak. We'd like to think everything is linear, and just because you see one thing, we talked ourselves into Georgia being this world beater after the Texas game, and then quickly we're reminded that this team has a lot of issues to work out. If it's playing football in that building, I'm going to trust them to be able to win.
Hmm.
If it's not,
Unless it's against Alabama.
they haven't played Alabama at home in over 10 in since 2015, right? I think so,
Mm.
if I'm not
SEC
mistaken,
conspiring against the dogs, Paul.
right? But yeah, Georgia got exactly what it needed. And now, even if it is on the outside looking in of the SEC championship, again, this could come down to that tiebreaker, wherein head to head is kind of thrown out because it is this like round robin of this team beat this team, oh, but this team beat this team. And it's not clean in that way. And this does come down to winning percentage of conference opponents. Georgia could be on the outside looking in. Georgia at 10-2 would be perfectly fine based on the fact that they now have another big time quality win. You beat another team that was, at least at the time, in the top 10. TBD on whether or not Tennessee will be in the top 10 on Tuesday night.
You're never gonna guess who Georgia plays next.
It's UMass. Come on. Really, I know this stuff, Will? You think I know what Ryan Bamford has cooked up on that UMass schedule? 25% of which SEC teams. You know how Notre Dame is basically like a de facto ACC team
Yeah.
because it has like 6 ACC opponents a year. UMass SEC team, get 3 of them worked in there. You get Mississippi State, you get the Mizzou home game and Georgia. So UMass
Florida State
is
is like pounding on the door of the SEC, like let us in, let us in. And UMass is like sitting there with donuts, like, oh, anyway.
UMass is honorary Vandy this year. That's what this
We
turned
had to
into.
have a Vandy, and we created
Yeah.
one in the aggregate. One thing really quick on this game, I definitely had an opportunity to say this, and I just didn't jump in then. The Josh Heupel system, it's kind of ironic because remember that was the first thing we ever talked about was the Josh Heupel system and how it would work in the SEC. Just wanted to make kind of a funny note on that. Georgia is literally built exactly like you said to stop Tennessee. Because they have discipline, they're a high IQ football team, but they have talent. Tennessee's system is designed to confuse you and to expose your inferior athletes down the depth chart. But Georgia has and will never have, except for the wide receiver room, inferior athletes down the depth chart. So yeah, to your point, these games are going very differently. But there is one theme is that Kirby Smart, it's kind of like his chops to the China offense.
Yeah. I think that there is still a possibility that Georgia and Tennessee could face each other in the college football playoff. That
I think
that
Kirby Smart would love that.
that would be advantage Georgia if that was a
Yeah.
first round matchup. But Georgia now at least kind of feels like, okay, even if we don't get to the SEC championship, and let's not do that. Here's what I don't want. I need to get on the record with this, and I've been thinking this for a while and trying to find the right way to say this. The only thing that I am rooting against moving forward, and this applies to any team, maybe it'll apply to Georgia. I don't know which team is going to be in the SEC championship. Maybe it'll apply to Bama. What I don't want to see is the selection committee punishing a team for that it would have had in the college football playoff before conference championship week and then watches that team play in conference championship week, loses, and then drops them out of the field. That's the
Yep.
scenario I think would be so stupid. And for all the talk about incentivizing conference championships, that would completely take away from it. And you would have so many teams that are just like beside themselves wondering, what do you value? Even Kirby Smart said afterwards, I don't know what the selection committee values anymore. And that's because his team dropped 9 spots and dropped behind Miami. Will Tennessee drop 9 spots? No, but Tennessee, I think, will get dinged pretty significantly. And there will be a lot of people wondering, what does the selection committee actually value at this point? Because head to head will be the thing that we typically default to. And in a case like this, you can't really just default to that.
Yeah,
All right.
I think like to your point real quick, like best thing you can be is a big brand name team that just misses their championship game. You know,
But
like
like
if you're
Georgia and Bama are going to have the quality wins, though. That's what I'm
Mhm.
saying is like it's going to come. And I realized that Bama had the two wins against teams that were in the CFP top 25 as of Saturday. That are those two of those teams will fall out. LSU is going to fall out. Mizzou is going to fall out. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, Bama's resume won't look quite as good. I get that, but they're still going to have the quality wins. Bama and Georgia are compared
Mhm.
to so many of these other teams, even compared to the Big Ten teams as well. And people will just say that. And Danny Kanell is going to get on Twitter and he's going to say, "Oh, they just rewarded the big brands." So we're just not going to look at the strength schedule. We're just not going to look at any of that. Let's it's
No,
just a
like I
convenient
get you, but
argument.
you see what I'm saying. It's that like we talked about this with Texas in the preview. We can talk about it later, obviously, but it's just the fact of you want to do enough to get in. That's all that matters, basically. You
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. We'll get to Texas's playoff stuff as well because that's kind of Texas and Texas A&M are kind of on their own island. They're kind of
Mhm.
lost in the shuffle as the last 2 teams in the SEC with just 1 conference loss. How about that? All
Mhm.
right. Mizzou, South Carolina. Finally, finally, South Carolina beats Mizzou. First time since 2018. First time ever that South Carolina faced 3 consecutive AP top 25 teams and won all 3 matchups. How about that?
Goodness. Yeah.
Dang. First time since 2014 that South Carolina won a battle of AP top 25 teams. They didn't make it look easy. They tried to blow it. They did. Nearly blew a 21-6 halftime lead. First, before we get to the South Carolina part, unbelievable toughness by Brady Cook, man. This has not been a year to remember for him. I don't know what his future holds in this sport, but golly, tip of the cap to that guy because after he had that fumble and the self sack going into halftime, whatever the heck that was, we texted about this. I said I have too much respect for Brady Cook to clip that because of how bad that sequence was. I could have gotten engagement off that 6-second clip. Just wow, Brady Cook can't even tie his own shoes today. Could have done that in the midst of a 21-6 first half. And I said, no, Connor, you will not take the bait. You will not do that. Brady Cook deserves better. He has earned our respect at this point. And buddy, he earned it in the second half because that was a great response from him. The go-ahead score to Luther Burden, that was the best version of Brady Cook. Fourth down, if you didn't see this, fourth down, Mizzou has to have it. Game on the line. Burden makes this one-handed grab downfield in single coverage, shakes off the defender, scampers into the end zone. Just unreal. Best moment of Mizzou's season, and it lasted for roughly 5 minutes. That's in real time, like 5 minutes of total time. Mizzou got to enjoy that, maybe even less, because don't you know it, Lenore Sellers leads South Carolina right down the field, and Rocket Sanders takes a shovel pass through the entire state of Missouri, basically, with 15 seconds left to be able to score that go-ahead touchdown. You know, in Friday Night Lights, the movie, which, by the way, is 20 years old. That's Goodness. Don't like that. The end of the movie where Billingsley drags the entire Carter defense, and you go from wondering why Permian ran this play, this running play in a gotta have it situation when it was 4th and 15 or whatever it was. And they ran that play to try and get into the end zone. And then by the end of the play, you're wondering if there is any human being on this earth who can take down Billingsley besides maybe his dad. That's how I felt watching Rocket Sanders on that run. Mm-hmm. Instead of getting stopped short like Billingsley did, spoiler alert, Rocket just wouldn't be denied. Would not be denied. Unreal grit shown by South Carolina to be able to shake that off. It would have been a very classic South Carolina type loss if the Luther Burden touchdown had prevented them from being able to win that football game. I thought they were cooked. I thought we were going to sit here and talk like we are right now, not about South Carolina being this really solid team that nobody wants to play, but instead being like, South Carolina had a really nice stretch in the middle of the season, but ultimately this is kind of why they're not, in that upper echelon, that top 5, top 6 mix of SEC teams. South Carolina's just a darn good football team. And I know they had issues in this game, didn't have an overwhelming defensive showing. Only 2 sacks on a limited Brady Cook, one of which was Kennard in those final 15 seconds. Defenses had better days, no doubt about it. Plenty to watch in that film room. But, man, so much of this, Will, the development of Lenore Sellers with Dow Loggins.
Oh, yeah. Very real.
He is a treat to watch, okay? I am trying to hold myself back because he's still got the ball security issues. There's too many instances in which the ball just kind of squirts out of his hand, or he doesn't sense the strip sack and he gets hit from behind or something like that. And that's still going to be the case with Lenore Sellers. He had one instance where Johnny Walker got to him, and then the next play, Sellers sensed that pressure coming from Walker. I think he was on a stunt or on a twist, whatever it was, and he rushed the throw and he sails it for a pick. That stuff he's still kind of working through. All right, he's not out of the woods there. But Lenore Sellers officially leads all of college football in that dude's about to get mauled. Nope, he's going to shake him off like a rag doll and find a guy 20 yards downfield. He leads the country in that. I don't know what the name is for that. I kind of want to call him KJ's. Maybe not playing as well these days with how his college career's played out. But you get what I'm saying, and I'm definitely not going to call him anything that is resembling a certain Auburn quarterback who won a national championship in 2010. But Lenore Sellers does this every single week, where he just keeps his eyes downfield and trusts that somebody is open after somebody tries to bring him down by the shoulders, and he just can't do it. I thought he was brilliant, man. 5 touchdown passes in this one, 353 passing yards. That wouldn't have happened a month ago. And I think you need to give Dow Loggins his love, man. This has been a developmental project that South Carolina is reaping the benefits of at a very critical point of the season.
Yeah, I think we should call those Josh Allens.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good.
I don't want to bring up the name of a former Steelers quarterback for lots of reasons. So I think that this Josh Allen works a little bit better because he's a little bit more mobile too.
Cordell Stewart.
Yeah. Cordell Stewart. That's the one. No, but
Charlie Batch.
Charlie Batch.
Tommy Maddox. No?
Bobby Maddox in the chat. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. It's so funny. This is a game. Let me kind of take a step back. So when we did the preview, it was about, okay, which one of these teams is like for real, right? And Mizzou, in kind of typical Mizzou fashion, they get the ball back just under the 2-minute warning, like right before halftime. And it's like, okay, you guys have a chance to go like tie this game if you do a couple of things. You're gonna have all the momentum in the world. Okay, they end up kind of self-destructing, melting down to the point where they're down 2 scores. And the way that the half ended for Mizzou was so, like, I hate to say typical Mizzou, but like tragic. You're going, okay, they're like on the road. You could hear like the environment start to shake. And to your point, like, tragically enough, I think Mizzou did do enough to show why people believed in them. I think that, to your point, even with the injuries, Brady Cook played well. Now again, we can talk about preseason well versus current expectations of well, but
Sure.
based on like what could have happened in this game, I know we're talking about a ranked team here, but the fact that they were able to come all the way back, got the Luther Burden play. To your point, they did a decent job getting that boy Weiss involved finally. And so, like, you could see Mizzou kind of like taking their shots, learning, getting better. But then, to your point, okay, Luther Burden play, got this huge Rocket Sanders play. And then as you go back and, we look at the game, it's like, oh, of course, Rocket Sanders had a great game. Not really. Rocket Sanders, like, had one amazing play and he's still a great player. But exactly to your point, I think this is just like the Lenora Sellers coming out party if he didn't already have that for A&M, right? Because that was a little bit of a rocket show as well. This was just straight up, hey, you got this young quarterback, you have the offense that's been kind of up and down, and again, like, you have this cast of characters. You don't have like a number one go-to receiver. Simon, man, that guy has
Josh
been
Simon's playing
nice.
well. He's playing really,
Yeah.
really well as and somebody that is relied upon a lot because of the lack of depth in South Carolina's receiver room. By the way, getting Nick Harbor involved. Nick Harbor's figuring some things out. He
Hmm.
really is. It's nice to see that guy coming along. And it has been a slower process than South Carolina fans certainly hoped, but he is developing into somebody that Lenore Sellers can actually rely on in some of these games, which is big. I got a question for you, and you're gonna have to ground me here. Tell
Okay.
me if I'm crazy for even discussing this. Two redshirt freshman quarterbacks in the SEC that I'm
Yep.
thinking of. One of which Lenora Sellers. One looked totally in control in the first month of the season and looked special, looked really special. He has since not looked quite as special. I would say Lenora Sellers is kind of the inverse, right?
Hmm.
Will, can you think about how much we'd be freaking out if Nico were doing the things that Lenora Sellers is doing right now? And ask
Yep.
yourself this. Ask yourself this.
Hmm.
Who's doing more with less? Lenora Sellers, right?
For sure.
If you told me, Connor, Nico or Sellers next year, who do you want? Who would be your guy, right? All things neutral. We're not just talking about who they are in their specific scheme, but who they are as quarterbacks right now, the way that they see the field, the way that they can beat you. Who would you take? I mean, I probably still default to Nico a little bit. Okay. But I wonder how many people would take Sellers. I think there will be an interesting debate when we do, these quarterback rankings in the preseason next year. A lot of that's to be determined with guys, whether or not they're going to come back, who gets who from
Hmm.
the portal and all that stuff, right? But I wonder how many guys will be ranked ahead of Lenora Sellers going into next season. Okay. Depends how he's going to finish this season. But the guy that he has been for South Carolina during this winning streak, and again, like he didn't have to be great against Oklahoma. I would say definitively these last 3 games, this 3 game sample size, he has looked the part against defenses that we actually respect. Okay. And this is a guy that is blossoming into the exact player, and maybe even better than the player that Shane Beamer hoped he would be when they decide we're not going to go take a huge swing in the transfer portal. We're going to stick with Robbie Ashford as kind of our insurance policy. We're going to trust that we know how to develop this guy, and he's going to be able to do a lot of the things, more of the things that Spencer Rattler could do, just from not necessarily from an NFL throw standpoint, but just to be able to build an offense around this guy. And I'm really impressed. I love me some Lenore Sellers. I know this wasn't a perfect game. They definitely had some lulls in the second half, and it's a different story if they don't have that drive at the end. But man, he is just he is developing into a guy that people really need to take note of, not just in the SEC, but I think across college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's honestly been playing well all year. I mean, going back to the Kentucky game, I think it was like shocking when he was like controlling that game. He wasn't asked to do a
He got
lot.
hurt in that game too, as
Yeah.
well. He left that game briefly,
Hmm.
but took advantage of some short fields as well with the turnovers and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, didn't play poorly in that game. Brock Vandegrift certainly played a lot worse than Lenore Sellers that day.
Yeah, played well enough to win, and like to the point that we made a couple times, like got hurt in the LSU game. I thought he was playing really well in the LSU game, well enough to win. Like I think that was the difference in that game. And so yeah, I'm right there with you. And it's funny because to start the season, you would think to yourself, okay, well, one of these guys has that Josh Heupel offense, Nico. One of these guys has Dowell Loggins. I don't think in any universe you would think those guys are in similar. Like even now, most people would say, okay, Josh Heupel's a
Yeah,
better offensive mind. But the thing that's weird is that like now that Nico is kind of trapped in this prison, and the Norris Sellers is like the warden of a prison. He's like, look, I've seen this offense be terrible. I've seen guys running nowhere. I've seen weird fumbles. I've seen all this stuff, and yet I am in control of this entire thing. Like if I need to run, I can run. If I need to do like so, that's kind of what we were looking for out of Nico. Is my point. Like talking about making plays with his legs. And I often say, and this has gotten me in trouble in the past, but I'd rather have a single threat quarterback than a no threat quarterback. Like Sellers, I know is a super plus athlete. I know he can power run. I know he's speed, or he has speed. I know he has size. So when it comes to that, like let's say nothing is working, you could do a lot more Sellers. So yeah, I think based on that, and like I hate to say it like this, but it's true. Like this is why at the NFL level, guys have had so many questions about Josh Heupel players because you just never know how they're going to play outside of that system. And so, yeah, I think given like neutral, I think Lenore Sellers is kind of the clear answer here.
yeah, he is rising up those ranks very, very quickly, and he's going to be a guy that we'll talk about a lot in the offseason. I think even though South Carolina have kind of done I don't think it's a team with a playoff path thing, just because of the blowout loss to Ole Miss, all the potential 10-2 SEC teams that would stand in their way. Um, I think that can be true while also saying, is South Carolina one of the 10 scariest teams in the sport? Yes,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. No question. This is easily Beamer's best team. I think they have a real chance to go 9-3 this year. We'll wait and see how that Clemson game plays out, but they could have a 10-win season. You know what's also crazy?
Hmm.
Mizzou can also still have a 10-win season.
Oh, yeah, of
it,
course.
it would be one of the most hollow 10-win seasons ever. It's kind of like how hollow the South Carolina 9-win season was in 2017, where they didn't beat a ranked team. I want to say, or they might have had one ranked win or something like that
Hmm.
that year. But South Carolina's 10 potential 10-win season, if they both somehow got to 10 wins and won out, South Carolina's would have such a different feel than Mizzou's because of the fact that in their three toughest games, two of which were blowout losses, and then this was one of those toughest games as well. And you felt like, wow, they actually showed some grit. They responded. They didn't just get blown out, but instead they come up short. And ultimately, drink can't even spin the three-loss argument for this Mizzou team with the lack of quality wins. But just a strange season, and two programs that you could look at in the standings and be like, oh yeah, they're right next to each other. Very, very different overall feel for the trajectory and what has impressed us about each of these teams this season.
Yeah, I mean, and this is why this is one of my favorite like random matchups because like we talked about in the preview pod, like these are two teams kind of at about the same level. You know, we talked about that earlier in the season with A&M with Mizzou. We saw that win at the time, and you know, with so many teams in the SEC, it's great to have this many opportunities as a measuring stick. Honestly, I say just throw in an extra conference game at this point because everything's chaos anyway.
Here
Because I
for it.
want to,
Yeah,
yeah, I want to see more of these teams with like head to head like this, and I mean, heck of a job by Beamer. You know, former lad of the week several times. The fact that he had a 3-game losing streak in which he had to play three ranked teams, LSU, Ole Miss, at Alabama, could have and probably should have won two of those games against LSU and Alabama. I know I made a lot of a deal of it at the time, but this is kind of what I saw in this team that they won four straight after that. Lenore Sellers and Rocket Center has been playing out of their minds. That everybody's been stepping up, talking about Simon, the D line, like the whole team is playing well together. This is definitely one of the best teams in the SEC. And I think it's just a scheduling thing that they ended up here because, I mean, how many, if you took Georgia and said, hey, you got to play LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, how would they go? Probably 1-2, 2-1. Like,
2-1.
okay. You know what I'm saying? Probably 2-1, but we're assuming they beat Alabama and Ole Miss there, which they didn't do this year. So that's the thing, playing back to back or whatever. They beat LSU for sure. But yeah, like that's what's kind of crazy is that this team is actually better than they look on paper because their schedule was so brutal for the middle of the year. They went through a 3-game losing streak and just pulled out of it. It's so hard for a team to just lose 3 games and get this good. I don't know how many times we've really seen that when it's not really due to an injury. Yeah, Leonard Sellers got hurt, but it wasn't like he was like, oh, now he's back and we're good. So yeah, like heck of a job. I mean, real quick, I mean, do we think Beamer has some like SEC Coach of the Year votes? Do you think that's going to go to one of the playoff guys? Like, given how the season's gone for him and he was on the hot seat to start the year.
I think that's to be determined. I think Clark Lee is going to have a real case.
Mm,
I think if Mike Elko beats Texas and then they get to the SEC championship for the first time, a year one Mike Elko is absolutely going to have a case for it.
absolutely.
But he's got to be part of it, man. Like I definitely think he's worthy of that conversation because you're right. The job that he did with a team that we thought we had kind of figured out. And by the way, yeah, not necessarily a 3-game losing streak because they had a game against Akron mixed in there. That's what I was just checking real quick. We don't need to discuss the final score of Joe Moorhead's team that day.
Mhm,
But you're right. It was a 3-game losing streak in SEC play, at least after you had the great win against Kentucky. You're 1-3 in SEC play. Same old, same old. How do you respond? And they have
mhm,
responded incredibly, incredibly well. Yeah. Beamer should be getting perhaps a little bit of a not a vote of confidence from whoever his new boss is going to be, but a little bit of that increased incentive, we'll say. Maybe a little raise at season's end. Maybe Beamer's going to end
mhm.
up joining the $9 million club. That drink is in after this year. It's certainly been an impressive season from this South Carolina team. All right, LSU, Florida. You ready to talk about this, Will?
Let's do it.
All right. Two things can be true at the same time. I think that is both the biggest win of the Billy Napier era and the worst loss of the Brian Kelly era. True or false?
I have to think about the worst loss of the Brian Kelly era, but it's definitely the biggest one of the Billy Napier era.
You could say Brian Kelly losing 2 years ago to A&M to close out the regular season. You ruined your playoff chances by losing to a team that wasn't going to a bowl game.
Mhm.
That, in theory, is a worse loss, could end up being a worse loss. But you had still accomplished a lot to get to that point. You were still going to be playing in an SEC championship already. So I think this is worse for a lot of different reasons, and not just because Florida begged Brian Kelly to be nice to its tables afterwards. Savage move by Florida social media to do that. Well, LSU held the football for 42 minutes and scored 1 touchdown.
Yep.
That's hard to do. It's really
Yeah.
hard to do. LSU was facing a true freshman quarterback with an apparatus on
An
his leg,
apparatus. Yep.
preventing him. That apparatus prevented him from taking advantage of LSU's biggest weakness. That should have been prayers answered, right? We talked in the preview pod about what's Billy going to do with DJ Lagway. Is he going to try and take advantage of this obvious weakness with a quarterback run game? No. He's
Bold
going
of you
to
to
wear
assume
something.
that we know what LSU's biggest weakness is because we
True.
assume we've now seen that LSU can't stop people from jumping over their special teams unit. It's a
True.
fun new bag of tricks to see what LSU's biggest weakness is every week.
I legitimately asked the question on Twitter when that happened, when LSU missed the kick after Florida jumped over the offensive line, and we've seen it called. We saw it called in the Vandy Auburn game. We didn't see it called earlier in the year with LSU and South Carolina. Like
That's
it's a
like a ball
leverage
don't lie
penalty.
thing to me. I'm not mad about that at all. That if you let a guy fully hop over your long slash deep snapper, whoever they were employing on that day, you just deserve that one. Like that's easy.
What the explanation that I got from people on the internet is
Mhm.
that the leverage penalty is called when a defender makes contact
Oh
with
yeah.
anybody in the offensive line. There's no way officials are going to definitively know if a guy is making contact every single time. So
That was Vince
leverage is
Carter.
very
He
subjective.
cleared that dude. That was not if he had maybe dragged some of the particulars on him, it would have been a little bit more of one of those penalties, but he didn't.
Very true. Very true. But yes, this ends up being an unbelievably embarrassing performance. I think for LSU when you've always found a way to beat this team.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say always, but the last
Always.
5 years.
That's no, that's the best part is that, I already knew this was not a good LSU team. I have watched several bad LSU teams still beat Florida. That's the best. I mean, Florida is
Throwing
basically
a shoe to be able
oh
to
yeah.
give LSU a chance to win a football game. Yeah. Oh, you need to kick a football through this fog from what 56 yards. Like, no, LSU will find a way.
Yep. LSU,
Always.
Florida's had one good team without Tim Tebow on it, and LSU beat them on the road. That team played for an SEC championship and pretty much tied Alabama the whole game. And LSU still, I felt great the entire time. Yeah, I mean, so that's pretty much what it is here. Like LSU beat themselves yet again. To your point, biggest one of the Billy Napier era. I actually do think LSU saved Billy Napier's job. So
He's not getting. He got the vote. He wasn't getting fired if he lost this game.
no, no, no. But in terms of like if he lost this game and then got blown out, we talked about this, that there was kind of an out there where it's like, well,
Eh.
things have changed. I The cool thing is, if you're an SEC fan, DJ Lagway is staying at Florida through this offseason. So you're all welcome.
I am excited for DJ
Yep.
Lagway. I really, really am. Another guy that's going to be really fun to rank in these SEC quarterback rankings. But yeah, let's start with the Florida aspect of what went right for Florida. Just I
Mhm.
thought a complete win and needed every phase and kind of got it. Needed DJ Lagway to look the part in his return without the full arsenal, obviously. Trust that he was going to make smart decisions, moving the ball downfield, not put the ball in harm's way. The throw that he made off his wrong foot to
Mhm.
Badger that set up the go-ahead score was chef's kiss. That
Yep.
was, I am thinking to myself, what did this guy just do in that spot? Because he steps up in the pocket. He somehow just always has his shoulders perfectly squared to that. I'm not a mechanics expert, but to me, it looked like he did everything you could have hoped a guy is going to do if he's going to throw off his wrong foot in that spot.
Mhm.
And to hit a receiver downfield in stride like that, man, I can't sit here and tell you that he's the only Florida quarterback who makes a throw like that ever. But with all of those elements that I just brought up, the list of guys who can make that throw, who have worn a Florida uniform, it's not very long. It's
Felipe Franks furious after the 2017 Tennessee game. Wow.
even Felipe wouldn't make the
Stolen valor.
look. That throw was, I mean, it's a Hail Mary. There's a certain bit of luck involved and a certain bit of an inept Tennessee Bob Shoop defense that played a part in that one. You didn't think I'd go back to Bob Shoop, not
Bob
Bob
shoot.
Stoops, Bob Shoop. People forget that.
But Lagway's special, man. Yeah, just to like fully bring that around. He's a guy that has been asked to do crazy things, with an injury, with the hurt receivers, with the receiver room that's not hasn't been deep in a long time. And I think that, leaving those guys in single coverage, certainly a mistake because Lagway is a guy who can any play is a chance. And if you're a team
Yes.
like Florida that, your season's gone the way it has, you're kind of adjusting against a team like LSU, having a chance on every play is exactly what you can hope for going forward. That, ideally, bring guys in, whatever it may be. But it's weird because you would think you would want a mobile quarterback in this situation. But in reality, having a guy that can teleport the ball down the field 50 yards at a time, pretty rad, especially against LSU safeties. And we saw Sage Ryan get weight roomed in this game. We saw Jordan Gilbert get weight roomed in this game.
Ashton
Major
Stamps,
Burns,
the corner, had a rough day. Yeah.
yep, Major Burns. I mean, that guy, get ready to learn accounting, buddy. Like after the 2 weeks he's had. So yeah, I mean, it's the fact that when LSU has pretty good corners, right? And we saw still a pretty solid game from Zy Alexander. And the safeties they do, which are Basura, having a guy like DJ Lagway on every play had me holding my breath.
You have to. And it didn't
Mhm.
even matter that he only completed 50% of his passes. Didn't feel like more. You
No,
know,
no.
maybe yeah, look, maybe it felt like more to me because the splash plays were still there, but you're right. Just every play you have a chance, even if he's not going to be this running threat, but he can just always get off this throw into a tight window that just kind of can overcome scheme, it can overcome pressure. And it's not to say he plays mistake-free football, but man, he just makes big time plays. He does. Didn't take a single sack in this one too, even with the apparatus. And look, I thought Swinson, who was out in the first quarter for disciplinary issues, I thought he had his moments in this game where it
Big day
looked
for
like,
discipline issues.
yeah, it was. Definitely was. Not surprising necessarily to hear LSU dealing with discipline issues late in the season, but nonetheless, I thought he still had his moments where it looked like he was about to feast and he was beating his guy off the block, and you're just like, oh boy, we didn't. Thank goodness I didn't pause on that one. Um, we'll just go right past that. But
Anyway,
this was still an unbelievable showing given the circumstances for Florida,
Yep.
given what everybody's been saying about this team this year. And, I thought as great as Lagway was, the Florida defense was even better, right?
Yep. Yep.
7 sacks against an LSU offensive line that had allowed 6
Yep.
all year. All year. Florida just cost LSU the Joe Moore Award. Did
Wow,
they
that was
not?
an L I was not even thinking about that. I think after some of the interior of LSU, the interior
Probably.
of LSU's offensive line has been so bad. I think last year they deserved the Joe Moore Award. This year's offensive line's cratered.
Sapp and James, man, there are going to be some tough moments in that film room for the LSU offensive line because they were just not picking those guys up. And Florida's defensive backfield, which I thought coming into this one, they're going to get gashed. How could I said in the preview pod, how could this not be a big game for Kyron Lacy? He did not
That
go
guy.
off. This was not a banner showing from really the LSU receiver room as a whole. Aaron Anderson had some nice moments, the Alabama transfer.
Aaron Anderson, that poor guy. He's like 5'7", and it feels like every time he catches the ball, he's like got 99 speed on Madden. That guy had a great day. Kyron Lacy, man, goodness, this guy is like a random actor playing an LSU wide receiver that he saw on Sundays. It's so funny. Like he has like the big old chain. He's got like the moments. He's got the memes. But like when you really need him, he's gonna drop the football. And it's so crazy that he's had 5, 6, 7 of these moments in his career. And you go, oh wow, they've targeted Kyron Lacy yet. They targeted him. It's a drop, and he has like big plays. He obviously has the ability to hit those. But yeah, just a puzzling showing for LSU's offense. It's LSU kind of. Yeah, I'll let you go ahead because there's plenty to say about LSU and we're in Florida. But big win for Florida. I think their defense is turned around in a way that, like we've talked about, I don't know if we've seen. I don't know if we've seen a defense turn around in a way that it's like saving the head coach's job. I think the offense, funny enough, is a work in progress. You lose your starting quarterback, who's his veteran. You have a guy from Yale playing against Georgia. You still play well enough to win that game for most of it. Right. And really what it is, what the common story is, the defense, right? You find a way to expose what Carson Beck is bad at, right? Which is staring directly at defensive backs. You
Not
find a way
Carson
to
Beck, Garrett Nussmeier.
no
Oh,
Carson Beck.
you're
You
harking
find
back
it,
to the
yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah,
cocktail
yeah.
party.
You
Gotcha.
you find a way to expose what Carson Beck is bad at, which is staring right at defensive backs. Then you find a way to expose what Garrett Nussmeier is bad at. He's not good under pressure. It's crazy because he's good at avoiding pressure, but once the pressure gets to him, it's like one of those win probability meters that inverts. Because like once the guy starts to get it within like a finger's length of Nussmeier, he just like forgets how to play football and fumbles. And we've seen it now, I guess 3 games in a row. LSU's gone a month without a win. And so yeah,
Not great.
the fact that they went, okay, Carson Beck, you basically sit back in coverage and make him make decisions. Okay, Nussmeier, we pressure him, he freaks out, he fumbles, he does the same thing. So yeah, I think this is a defensive improvement, the likes of which we've pretty much never seen before.
If you told me like in the preview pod, hey, what's more likely? LSU will have 7 completions of 30 yards and 0 sacks allowed, or the inverse of that, 0 completions of 30 yards and 7 sacks allowed. We're taking the first option every single time. Like, oh wow, they really went off. Florida secondary got exposed. LSU's offensive line once again gave Garrett Nussmeier time, and they
Mm-hmm.
looked like they were totally in sync. I'm stunned to think that the inverse happened with the way that they wanted to be able to throw the football, the way that they thought they were going to be able to win these matchups on the outside, and it just wasn't there. And it wasn't there because of the pressure that Florida dialed up. I was really critical of the Ron Roberts hire. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I said Billy hired his buddy. Billy
Mm-hmm.
hired his buddy and overlooked the fact that he was fired each of the last 2 seasons at power conference jobs, fired by Dave Aranda at Baylor, fired by Hugh Freeze after 1 season at Auburn. Why did Billy Napier think that this guy was going to save his defense, a defense that continues to be unbelievably disappointing? Why did he think that bringing him in to be the defensive play caller was going to be the answer? Hand up, I was wrong. They have figured things out. And I don't think it's just as simple as, well, they were feeling really good playing at home. No. Do that against that offensive line and against that quarterback is no small feat. It's just not. And that is a huge part of why this has turned around for Florida. And look, this is their first ranked win in 14 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
First ranked win since the Tennessee game last year. Biggest, most lopsided win against LSU since 2008, even as well, by winning by 11 points. because all of those games in the 2010s were like, oh, it's going to be decided by 3 points or something like that. They had so many of those one score games,
Mhm.
but their bowl hopes are now significantly better
Mhm.
because if you had lost that one, you're going to have to beat Ole Miss, which we're already penciling in that Florida's going to beat Florida State. One
I
win
was
Florida
gonna
State.
say now you get to play Florida State. This is a dream come true.
But that matters for this group. You know, you get the
Mhm.
extra practices, you've got all these underclassmen, get DJ Lagway more reps with these guys and have a chance to finish with a winning season. Florida's got a chance to finish 7-6. I don't think they will. I don't think they will beat Ole Miss, but at the same time, man, who knows? Who knows with the way that they played on Saturday in every facet. And I just think that there is a question that we need to ask, and you're gonna
There's so
hate
many
this.
questions we need to ask.
You're gonna hate this, Will. I'm telling you right now,
Okay.
okay? Don't punch me through your computer right now. Please don't.
Mhm.
Florida has 5 wins. Obviously, Ole Miss at home, and then Florida State to end the season. LSU has 6 wins. Still has 2 home games against Vandy and Oklahoma,
Mhm.
including the postseason. Which team ends up with more wins, Florida or LSU?
Let's see. LSU has Vandy,
And Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and including the postseason. I mean, I would probably still take LSU, given that Ole Miss is on there and they have more wins. Yeah.
I would probably take LSU. Is it going to?
Postseason's weird though, because you might end up. I mean, that's the thing. Like Billy Napier played an Oregon State team last time, that was kind of on the other end of this, so where they were like, okay, now we're angry. So you just never know with a
Yeah.
bowl game.
And who knows where this LSU team could be in the postseason because I don't think we're going to get another 39 scholarship bowl game. Usually you need a change at the head coaching position for something like that to happen, but
Yeah.
golly, well, this LSU team was 6-1, up double
Uh-huh.
digits on the road and on the verge of moving into primary position as the last SEC unbeaten in conference play.
Mhm.
3 consecutive losses, scored 2 total touchdowns since that moment that
Mhm.
Marcel Reed stepped on the field, turned the ball over 7 times in the last 3 games, had a bye week sandwiched in there. But LSU has gone from this team has an extremely good chance of getting to Atlanta. That was in late October
Mhm.
to now, are they even going to finish with a winning conference record? It's stunning, man. It's absolutely stunning. And so much of this has to fall on Brian Kelly. It just does. Like, it's going to be the first time since 2016 that he's going to miss out on 10 wins. That streak, the
Mhm.
longest active streak of 10-win seasons in the sport, that is now off the table because they just suffered their fourth loss of the year. This group just looks lost, man. It looks like it almost feels sorry for itself at
Mhm.
times. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. I texted you after this, and maybe you had a different interpretation when Brian Kelly chewed out, I think it was Chris Hinton, right? After
Chris Hilton, but he also
Chris
shoot out
Hilton.
Kyron Mason. Yeah, I mean, pick one.
Yeah. Chris Hilton. Chris Hilton had the mistimed jump on that downfield play.
Mhm.
And the next, there was some lip reading that was done with what Brian Kelly said to Chris
Mhm.
Hilton. Um, and then they almost have a delay a game and they have to burn a timeout right after that because Brian
Mhm.
Kelly is basically chewing him during the 35 seconds. That felt like a microcosm for the day. I looked at that and thought this team is dysfunctional right
Mhm.
now, totally dysfunctional, and that was a really really bad look overall for the state of where the accountability is. Do people like playing for Brian Kelly right now? I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit too broad because it was just one isolated incident. But what was your take on kind of that and the way that this played out with LSU's demeanor?
So I feel like this is a serious answer. I feel like every time Brian Kelly loses, I have to mentally ask, is this the worst Brian Kelly loss? Because he finds a way to do the funniest thing ever every time he loses. So like,
Guys,
look, here's the thing. USC just won and they're barely going to go to a bowl game. So this might not even be the worst team that we lost to this year. Okay. So the thing that's so funny about this is like I said, LSU is unquestionably to me a better team than Florida. Now, the inability of LSU to execute in 3 straight openers in these weird late season games, I think we're seeing the identity, right? And there's a couple of things to it. So I think to your point, 95% of this falls on Brian Kelly. I think LSU's in a weird position with Joe Sloan, not to get too deep. Well, I think this is kind of loose news at this point, like national news. Bryce Underwood's the number one quarterback. number one recruit in the next class. Michigan and Dave Portnoy have been trying to like bankroll him to go to Michigan. I don't know. This guy has somehow found himself choosing between the worst two offenses in America for a quarterback, which is pretty funny. But that's where he's at. So he's not, I don't think, going to go to, Alabama or something, hopefully. And so point being, LSU is in this weird position where they can't really fire or show any disdain for their offensive coordinator because Bryce Underwood has said over and over again, Joe Sloan is the reason, and Jaden Daniels in this whole progression are the reason why I'm going to LSU. That being said, it shouldn't be up to Brian Kelly chewing out a guy on the sidelines if we could call a play. I mean, like Joe Sloan, we have like this I'm a hater of multiple coordinators. I'm a hater of multiple minds in the same thing. And that's what LSU has on offense. And if we got co-offensive coordinators and an offensive head coach, and we need the head coach to be engaged to call a play, I think it's a pretty big deal. So
You're
yeah.
right. You're right, by the way. And that Brian Kelly's not sitting there calling plays. I was just speaking of more of
Mhm.
isn't it the head coach, an offensive minded head coach's
Yep.
responsibility to step in when the play clock is winding down
Yep.
and instead he's too busy chewing out a receiver for mistiming a jump and walking away from him apparently in a way that he didn't like. And instead, you would like your head coach to be the person that is seeing the play clock and is saying
Mhm.
to us, like, hey, let's go, let's go, let's go. And instead, that didn't play out. So that was
Well, you're right.
and
No,
maybe I'm
you're right.
connecting dots.
You're
Yeah.
right. I'm not disagreeing because at the end of the day, you're right. It's like I'm not gonna say it's like for the wrong reasons, but you're right, which is that why should that be an issue? Joe Sloan should just be in charge of that. Like why? Like that's the deal. It's like we shouldn't even be at the point where we're calling a timeout because we have an offensive coordinator who we should trust. But yet this guy looks like he's doing calculus in the backfield. I've said over and over and over again. He feels like it's like I'm gonna design the most beautiful, perfect play, and I'm like Rain Man, and I'm gonna draw this play we've never seen before. We're running the T formation at the goal line. We're doing all this crazy stuff, and it's like, bro, we have what should be at least the top 3 or 4 quarterback in the SEC. We have, not a good receiver room. I get it. The Chris Hilton jump, and I texted you at the time, like he missed time that jump so badly that the DB was like tackling him, and the receiver and the refs were like, "Dude, that's an uncatchable ball."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's like, and I said the
We're not
same
bailing
thing.
you out. Yeah.
We're not bailing you out. Like it's like, what was the DB supposed to do? You literally jumped 5 seconds too early. Was he supposed to just let you land and then keep covering you? No. And so why would you know as a DB the ball was that early? So point being, we so much happened wrong in this LSU game, and that's what's so freeing is that there becomes a point when your team is bad, and everybody can relate to this except for Alabama fans, I guess, that's listening to this, But everybody, when you've ever watched your team for all the older Alabama fans are obsessed with telling you how bad the Alabama was in the early 2000s, so you probably remember this too. But point being, you realize this point where you go, this team is not interested in winning, and that happened maybe like it was during the Alabama game for sure. That's why I was like, oh, Brian Kelly has robbed me of my joy of this Florida matchup because this was a team that I felt no fear of. And this LSU team should feel no fear of. But I felt bad about this team, and that's why I didn't talk an ounce of crap. And you've never seen me do that against Florida because, I mean, think about this, man, just to wrap a bow on all this. This is your offensive line, to your point, that has been the strong suit, these tackles, these first rounders, right? We had another false start from Will Campbell.
Yeah.
And we had a play where Emory Jones grabs the ball from Garrett Nussmeier, who is fumbling. His big butt runs forward trying to get a first down. And then he fumbles. The most impactful play by one of our first round tackles in this game was a fumble, dog.
Well, when that happened, I just thought to myself, I wish I could have been inside the brain of Emory Jones during this moment to pick up that football. Buddy, I finally have my opportunity. This is everything I've always dreamed of.
It's a
I'm gonna
heart
make a
of a
guy miss.
champion, and
It
I'm
was like,
on my way to the break of it. Oh
it's
no,
like
where'd that guy come
he would
from?
have he would have had to have gained like 20 yards with his leg, and he ran with his legs, and he ran right up the middle.
Ain't nobody can stop
Oh
me
god,
now.
great song. Nelly sampling Round Ball Rock, always a classic. The way that play with a guy that you're right is in theory one of your anchors. One of your anchors. You're just left wondering what in the world is in the mind of this collective LSU group right now, because it doesn't appear that winning a football game is certainly high on that list of priorities. I need to check out Emory Jones's PFF run grade after that. Has to be 0. Has to be. I understand.
Mhm.
I think he made one guy miss. Credit to
He
him for doing
lost
that.
elusiveness points on CFP.
Oh God, unreal. So this does fall on Brian Kelly. And look, I realize that there are certain people in this business who don't understand how to actually talk about the sport with any sort of nuance, Brandon Walker, and don't understand that it's not just like, oh, you have to fire this guy because it's a disappointing season. You're not firing a guy that has led consecutive 10-win seasons to start when you have more than $60 million that you would have to pay him. Brian Kelly's not getting fired at the end of year three. Let's get rid of that 90% of the remaining deal he is owed. We can say that a coach is underperforming and not assume that his job is on the line, but I'm not sure what the move is for Brian Kelly with his staff after you gutted your entire defensive staff. When you talked about the Joe Sloan,
Mhm.
Bryce Underwood, that link, that association, ironically enough, maybe similar to the Billy Napier, DJ Lagway connection.
Mhm.
But it's going to be an offseason full of questions for Brian Kelly. And a loss like this certainly stings more given where you were at not that long ago, 4 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And
Mhm.
just like that, it's gone. Yeah. Um, any other thoughts on this before we move on to the final game?
Yeah, I mean, on that, right? Here's the deal, and this was going to be like kind of point two in this whole thing, and I fully like this is LSU's fault. You know what I'm saying? Like credit to Florida, hitting the deep passes, stuff like that. But when you play a freshman quarterback in the SEC, you know, and on the other side of it, like, have you seen like with your eyeballs Paul Mabinga, the guy that LSU's starting at guard right
I
now?
don't want to keep dogging him too much. It's not been great. It's not been
He's
great.
it's just the fact that he looks like a basketball player. Like you look at our offensive line and it looks like four squares in a line. Like I like looked at him and I was like, uh-oh, this is a three-star we have starting. So I say that to say, you guys remember I've said this over and over again. Sometimes when you replace a coaching staff or a staff of players, it's about get those losers out of there, right? The problem that Brian Kelly has had historically is that he trusts older players. The older players in this team are losers. And they have
Yikes.
been, bro. I'm talking about Major Burns. I'm talking about Jordan Gilbert. I'm talking about the dudes that, and like, your offensive line can only lead you so far. So I don't think this is on Will Campbell and Emory Jones, who are trying to make a play, if nothing else, in this game. Okay. But your identity is what your identity is. And if you've been on three teams in a row that, despite employing Jaden Daniels, have found a way to tail off in the month of November, you got to have somebody in that locker room, be it a coach, be it a player, be it whoever. And like I said, Will Campbell's done all he can do. But you got to cycle out this group of like, dude, Josh Williams had a critical drop in this game. Kyron Lacey had a critical drop in this game. I'm done pretending like these guys, because they're veterans, are these like SEC stalwart, like, well, we got Will Anderson and Bryce Young. We got to trust them. It's like the guys that Brian Kelly recruited are finally kind of starting to play. And you see how some of those guys are being effective. But this loss ultimately falls on Brian Kelly, his coaching staff, 95%. And then that final five is the veteran leadership on this team. Sage Ryan. Okay. These guys that have been around forever. And Nuss too. Nuss has been on this team, and Josh Williams has been on this team since like pre-pandemic almost. It feels like Josh Williams has Nuss 2021. But that's all I'm going with there, is that this feels like the last year for a lot of things for LSU. I don't think they need to change up the coaching staff at all because of the Bryce Underwood thing. And we've seen in Billy Napier's case, sometimes that works out. It's better to just have the talent in the building and figure it out than rebuild everything. But that's what's so crazy. Like Brad Davis, do you place him? No, he's the best offensive line recruiter I've ever seen in my life. So eventually, restocking the cupboard from having 39 players, you're going to replace some of these key guys, but they just have to graduate, I guess, because Brian Kelly's going to play them until they are like hurt.
Yep. He said that the guys that are invested, they're the ones that'll be playing down the stretch. He's not going to do any favors to anybody. So yeah,
Yep.
trying times ahead for LSU. Where have you heard that before? All
Yep.
right. Texas, Arkansas. No style points for Texas in this ho hum victory. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
care. I don't think Texas cares at this point. Still important. Very, very important. This year has shown us that we shouldn't assume the worst when a team wins by double digits on the road in SEC play. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee would have gladly had a double digit win at Arkansas instead of a frustrating loss. Sometimes ho hum wins are nice. Texas won that game because it has one of the five best defenses in college football, period.
Mm-hmm.
Jade Barron, who, by the way, I looked up the pronunciation because I think I heard three different pronunciations of Jade during the broadcast. Jade, like that's the official guide. There's some in there. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
say that every single time. Jade Barron.
Mm-hmm.
He and Alfred Collins played their friggin' tails off. SEC defensive honors locked up by the end of this one, even as the first SEC game. Both with multiple TFLs and a sack. Barron had the early interception on a ball that Broden probably should have been able to haul in, but kind of threw it into a tight window. Taylor Green did, and it ends up being a nice pick by Barron, kind of flipped the momentum. At one point, Barron blitzed through the A gap. PK was dialing it up, man.
PK
Really,
is a
really dialing
king.
it up. Yeah, had himself a heck of a season, certainly in that Broyles Award conversation.
Hmm.
And that was at a point where it looked like Arkansas was kind of rallying back, and it ends up being this big third down stop. Those two kind of did it all for this Texas defense against an Arkansas defense or against an Arkansas offense that we know can dial up the explosive plays. I thought, I mean, Hawks had one sort of impressive drive, and that was it. When it looked like they were getting back into it, it's 13-10. Ends up being just 231 yards of total offense for Arkansas, 3.9 yards per play. Texas will take that all day. Taylor Green, they said coming in was about 90%. And the plan was, at least according to Bobby Petrino, to let it rip.
That's always the plan when you're Bobby Petrino.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. When is that not the plan, Bobby? Then tell me that, of course.
Bobby let it rip Petrino.
Yeah. Robert Patrick, let it rip Petrino. I don't think it's a let it rip strategy, even though obviously Taylor Green is limited with his legs. You're trying to keep him healthy. It's probably not going to set up particularly well against what Texas has done well, and they're getting healthier in the secondary as well. Texas ends up sacking Taylor Green 6 times in this one. This is a Texas team that can win ugly, and it can win ugly because it has an elite defense. They can totally just muck it up and play that style of game. They can play the field position thing. They can hit on a few of these key offensive plays and just sort of beat you. That's the good news for Texas, all right? They don't need style points, really, not based on what the selection committee continues to tell us. They're basically saying, we know that Texas lacks the quality wins. We still just think that they're better. That's what the selection committee has said week after week. Just avoid the letdown. And if you go into the college football playoff with 2 losses, Texas probably going to be fine. But if we're talking about whether or not Texas can win a national championship, which is a worthy discussion to have for the number 3 team in college football, starting to wonder whether or not we're going to see the downfield passing attack that I think they're going to need to get there. Okay. We talked about how favorable of a matchup this was, knowing that Arkansas was second to last in America with 9 50-yard pass plays allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Forget 50-yard pass plays in this one. Texas's only pass play that went for more than 20 yards was a wheel route to Wisner. That was it. They didn't have that downfield passing attack in the way that Ole Miss certainly did. And it looked like Jackson Dart and Jordan Watkins just got whatever they wanted. And this was against a bottom 10 pass defense. Arkansas deserves a lot of credit for it because it was a much better defensive showing. Travis Williams had a much better game plan to be able to contain this Texas offense. I thought that defensive line played really, really well. They had 3 new starters in the secondary. Maybe that played a new part in it. 9 TFLs Arkansas ends up having in this one. Texas had 39 yards of offense in the third quarter as Arkansas is kind of storming back into this game, but ultimately it's not enough to be able to upset another top 4 team in their building. I continue to say that I think Texas and Texas A&M can, well, let me back up. I think Texas can lose to Texas A&M and still have a very likely path to be able to make the playoff. I don't think that's obviously the desired plan. Okay, of course not. But if they beat Kentucky at home next week, they'll get that 10th win, and they're likely not falling off of that number 3 spot going into that matchup at Texas A&M to close the regular season. Are they going to drop 8 or 9 spots if they lose that game against a potential top 15 team on the road? I mean, I guess Georgia just had that happen to them, so never rule that out, the idea of dropping 9 spots. But I'll say that if Texas avoids a blowout loss at A&M, I think Texas pretty clearly will be in, and Saturday was kind of just about taking care of business.
Yeah, we talked about that at the time with the ranking show. It's that I think they've proven that Texas is their favorite SEC brand this year, right? And it's just all about narrative, right? Like when you get 2 teams, the committee, well, we've seen some big notable cases of them switching on teams, but usually we can kind of see, especially at this point in the season, if the committee takes a team seriously or if they're willing to forgive things. I think Texas has done enough to do that. And even in a game like this, I don't think really matters. It's about landing the plane, to your point.
I don't know that Arkansas is feeling overly optimistic. They're going to get to a bowl game, and I do think Arkansas still could have a path to be able to end up 7-5 in the regular season because that Mizzou game is to close the regular season. So
Mhm.
who knows kind of where both teams will be at. Maybe the health of Taylor Green is going to play a part in that. But that offensive game plan, I don't know that that's going to work against Mizzou either with what Mizzou has on that defensive line. And I think that that's a little bit troubling. It's just been a kind of a herky jerky year for Arkansas. And there was hope at one point that maybe they could pull off this type of upset. I think you're having a different conversation. Sam Pittman, I don't think won any of those supporters or a lot of people in Fayetteville that are just kind of done with Sam Pittman and just thinking this isn't the ceiling that we hoped we would have. But nonetheless, it's still an Arkansas team that has a realistic path to a 7-5 season. And I think if you had said that coming into the year, Arkansas fans still would have taken that, knowing that it also included a win against that Tennessee team. So we'll kind of wait and see how this plays out with them.
Yeah, I think that, that Oklahoma State win, as we say, aging like milk is
Loss.
not, or
Loss.
sorry, the Oklahoma State, the win by Oklahoma State, the loss by Arkansas, is kind of aging like, milk, because at the time it felt like, oh, this is a ranked Oklahoma State team. You played really well. But point being, like after the Tennessee, this is a classic, just like, we were talking about LSU, pause your season. After the Tennessee win, oh my gosh, Sam Pittman saved his job, all this different stuff. And we always say, like in this, I guess, business, like it's not about the wins and loss record, but it's how you lose the games, right? And what's so frustrating about this game is that, yeah, you kind of had Texas and Lambeau. No, you were never like leading, you were never like up and you blew it, right? But this was an all-time weekend for like weird fumbles, like low key. And like that fumble as they were coming back was so heartbreaking. You know what I'm saying? They had all the mo, they had Texas's offense kind of like grinding down, and then Texas was able to take over and come back. But yeah, I mean, you would think that if you look at their schedule and you go, okay, you got these two ranked games in a row, Ole Miss and Texas. Like you probably could lose both of those and still feel pretty good. But having like the blowout loss to Ole Miss, having your defense, which was the kind of the heart and soul of your team, not really get exposed because they did bounce back, but have that kind of thrown by the wayside. Then you play Texas. They're not playing their A game. You have the ability to kind of do what you did against Tennessee again. To your point, I get why people feel that way. I think given what Arkansas was looking at, where the beginning of their season was go sign a Boise State quarterback and Robert Patrick Petrino, you're throwing a Hail Mary this year, to get here and not really have, I'd say about what, two, I guess, like quote unquote embarrassing losses. You almost beat A&M, that's aged well. I think the Ole Miss loss and the LSU loss are probably quote unquote embarrassing. But I like, to your point, I think coming into this year, it's better than expected, probably.
Yeah, probably. I think the problem is just why is it what you expected? That's what Arkansas fans would
Mm-hmm.
point to and say this isn't good enough to just accept this. But yeah, I mean maybe that Mizzou game will loom large for the perception of this team going into the postseason and what ultimately they have coming back. That's going to be decided over the course of the next few weeks. All right, let's close by predicting what CFP top 12 is going to look like. This
Good
is
luck.
I don't think it's that crazy. At the
Mm-hmm.
top, it shouldn't be that crazy, but it gets a little bit weird once we kind of get into the latter half of at least the top 10 here. But Oregon will stay at 1. Candler texted me in the middle of Oregon being on the ropes at Wisconsin and asked this question. I think it's fascinating, right? Got a lot of engagement. Didn't do the Brady Cook for engagement tweet, but this question got some good engagement. Would Oregon have stayed at number 1 if it had lost? Because Ohio State is at number 2.
Head to head. Yeah.
Ohio State's got the head to head, which people say like, oh, just I talked before about how that's not everything. In a case like this, where
It would be, yeah. You're
I
literally
mean,
in
I think it'd be
conference. Yeah.
significant. Yeah. I would Ohio State have definitely moved ahead when Ohio State doesn't necessarily have a bunch of those quality wins. Maybe they're going to get one against Indiana. What a wild sentence that is. But
You feeling robbed right now? Indiana's still undefeated.
I not feeling robbed by what?
Indiana. I mean, I feel like they should have a spot at the table. Should be up there.
At which
I'm just kidding.
up where? Because
I'm just kidding. I was
okay.
doing the bit about you being Indiana grad. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, Indiana moving up to number 1. Yeah,
Yeah.
that obviously, of course, why wouldn't they? No, but it was just an interesting discussion because you weren't going to move Texas ahead of them with Texas having one loss and lacking the quality wins as well. Penn State, who has Penn State beat, You're not moving them ahead. Indiana, who have they beat? You're not moving them ahead. So it's
Mhm.
just one of those questions where I was like, man, am I going to have to go and try and figure out when the last time a number one team in college football lost a regular season game and then didn't move off of that number one spot, especially to an unranked Wisconsin team? That didn't end up happening. It was just a
Mhm.
fun half hour to entertain that. So Oregon at 1, Ohio State at 2, Texas at 3. I believe Penn State will be at 4. I think Indiana will be at 5. Notre Dame at 6,
Mhm.
based on what the selection committee did with them last week, continuing to show the Irish love. I don't think they have a loss to give, but I think they will continue to rise in those rankings after they just whooped Virginia. Miami at 7, Alabama at 8, Ole Miss at 9, Georgia at 10, Tennessee at 11, Boise State at 12. Um, Discrepancies. Where would you fall with those ranks? And again, this isn't where I would rank them. This is how I think the selection committee will rank them on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely feel like this is kind of my favorite part of the top 12 is I feel like if at this point, especially in this season, you think your team is like getting hosed, it's you probably had something to do, unless you're undefeated. And if you are, you have probably games ahead of you. So yeah, point being, and there's not, many of those really too many of those teams left. So yeah, I literally feel like the concept of being left out in a 12 team playoff to me is like whatever. I think that, some of the matchups are going to be super fun. But the cool thing about this sport, like we said, is that there are not 12 contenders every year. I think it's cool that a team like Boise State gets a shot. I think that we have so many two-loss SEC teams or SEC teams with kind of weird resumes that those are going to kind of fill out the bulk of this stuff. But I'm excited to watch a couple of these teams play again for sure, and not mine.
I would put Miami behind those 4 SEC teams for what it's worth. I would. I'd put them behind Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Tennessee, and I'd feel fine about that. The selection committee clearly views that differently.
Mm-hmm.
I would put, I would, I would rank Texas lower. I would move Indiana to number 1. No, I'm just kidding. But it does feel like there is, like at least last week, unless we have the selection committee doubling down and doing what it did with Indiana and BYU, moving them past Tennessee and saying, whoops, we kind of messed that up the first week. We're going to right that wrong. I'd be surprised if we all of a sudden saw a change of tune with Notre Dame and Miami. BYU losing, one of those things that if you're a Tennessee fan, you're on the outside looking in of an SEC championship,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, all right, that's helpful. That's good. Obviously, BYU can still end up getting the automatic bid if it wins the Big 12. But yeah, I don't have any Big 12 teams in that top 12. So Tennessee in that would be considered one of those teams that would be on the outside looking in, if I'm not mistaken. Did I do that right? I think
Mm-hmm.
so. Because you would have to put a Big 12 team in there, and then at Boise State, who ran away with it late against San Jose State, you would have to give them an automatic bid as well if they are one of the highest ranked conference champs. They would have one of those spots. And then you would have to put BYU in there as well if they win the Big
Mm-hmm.
12. But maybe Colorado will.
I was gonna say Colorado winning the Big 12 would be the most chaotic outcome like possible at this point or close to it because it's like, do you start looking at Colorado as a playoff team? I don't really think so. I mean,
I
if you had
no,
to,
I do. I absolutely do.
that's
I think
crazy.
I think
They're so
Colorado's gonna
close.
make I think Colorado's gonna make the playoff. I really
Let's
do.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am I'm amazed at what they have turned into. A game against Utah that I had that on in the multi-view, and I thought Utah was gonna claw back and this was gonna be a bad Colorado loss, and then they just foot on the gas late. And
Travis Hunter, man.
I'll be stunned if he doesn't win the Heisman at this point.
Yep.
I really would be.
Yep.
Crazier
Great
things have
call, but
happened. Crazier
yeah.
things have happened, but I'd be stunned
Great
if he
call
didn't.
by you, man. Shador staying upright, that team believing in their coach. I mean, a BYU Colorado Big 12 championship game is like objectively hilarious. Like they got to
Yeah.
do the big matchups and everything. It's like Deion Sanders and the faithful at BYU going to be a great fit.
Yeah. But lots to be sorted out over the course of these next couple weeks of the regular season. Tuesday night, just maybe touch some grass. Touch some grass.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get too upset about these rankings just yet, knowing what we still have. But a pivotal ranking nonetheless, I think it will be for teams that are trying to figure out what is our path as an at-large. That reality is kind of setting in right now. All right. If you haven't, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the STS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ Guerrero, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.